The blood on Owen Dalton's shirt had dried to a rust-brown stain by the time he stumbled into Council Bluffs, Iowa, his horse limping beside him, both of them more dead than alive after 3 days fleeing bandits across the Nebraska plains. It was spring of 1878, and the dusty streets of the riverside town looked like salvation itself, as Owen gripped his side where a bullet had grazed him, feeling the torn fabric of his only decent shirt hanging in tatters. He needed water, whiskey, and a place to hide, but what caught his attention as he staggered past the general store was the small sign hanging in a window across the street. Lillian Reed, Seamstress and tailor, all garments made and mended. Owen had never cared much about his appearance beyond keeping relatively clean and wearing clothes that did not fall apart. But standing there bleeding and desperate, he realized how conspicuous he looked. The bandits might have given up the chase, but word traveled fast along the Missouri River, and a man in torn, bloodied clothes attracted exactly the kind of attention he could not afford. He needed to look respectable, like someone who belonged in this town, not like a drifter running from trouble. He tied his horse to the post outside the seamstress shop and climbed the 3 wooden steps to the door, his boots heavy with exhaustion. A small bell chimed when he pushed inside, and the scent of clean fabric and lavender sachets replaced the smell of dust and sweat he had been breathing for days. The shop was neat and organized, with bolts of fabric lining shelves along one wall and a large cutting table dominating the center of the room. Sunlight streamed through lace curtains, making the whole space feel peaceful in a way Owen had almost forgotten existed. "I will be right with you," a woman's voice called from behind a curtain at the back of the shop. The voice was clear and pleasant, with a slight musical quality that made Owen think of church bells on Sunday mornings in towns he had passed through but never stayed in. He stood there feeling increasingly aware of how out of place he was, of the dirt caked on his boots, and the smell of horse and gunpowder that probably clung to him. When the curtain moved aside, the woman who emerged made him forget about his discomfort for a moment because she was not what he had expected. Most seamstresses he had encountered in various towns were older women, widows usually, who took up the trade out of necessity. Lillian Reed could not have been older than 23 or 24, with auburn hair pulled back in a practical bun and green eyes that assessed him with intelligence and something that might have been concern. "Sir, you are injured," she said immediately, moving toward him with quick steps. She was tall for a woman, he noticed, probably 5 feet 7 inches, and she moved with purpose rather than hesitation. "Should I fetch the doctor?" "No doctor," Owen said quickly, then softened his tone because he could hear how harsh it sounded. "I mean, it is just a graze. Already stopped bleeding. I actually came because I need clothes. New ones. Or at least clothes that do not look like I was dragged behind a wagon for a week." Lillian's eyes moved from his face down to his torn shirt, and the visible bandage underneath, where he had done rough field dressing on the wound. Her expression suggested she did not believe his injury was as minor as he claimed, but she did not press the issue. Instead, she stepped back and looked at him with the professional assessment of someone measuring a client. "You need everything," she said frankly. "Shirt, trousers, vest if you want to look properly respectable. That will take time. I can mend what you have now if you need something immediate." "How much time?" Owen asked. "For new clothes, I mean. Good ones." "A week for a full suit. 3 days if you only need a shirt and trousers and you pay extra for me to work late hours." She crossed her arms, and Owen noticed her hands were elegant but showed the small scars and calluses of someone who worked with needles and scissors daily. "But honestly, sir, you look like you need rest more than new clothes. When did you last eat?" The question surprised him because it was personal in a way that went beyond business. Owen could not remember the last proper meal he had eaten. Hardtack and jerky 3 days ago, maybe 4. His stomach felt like an empty canyon. "I have been traveling," he said, which was not exactly a lie. "Had some trouble on the road. Lost most of my supplies." Lillian studied him for a long moment, and Owen had the uncomfortable feeling she was seeing right through his careful half-truths. But whatever she saw in his face must have satisfied some internal debate because she nodded slowly. "There is a boarding house 2 streets over. Mrs. Chen runs it. Clean rooms, good food, reasonable prices. Tell her I sent you. Meanwhile, I can start on a shirt and trousers for you tonight if you leave a deposit and your measurements." She paused, then added, "You should also know that Council Bluffs has a sheriff who takes his job seriously. If you are running from something, this might not be the best place to settle." "I am not running from the law," Owen said, and this time it was completely true. "Just from men who wanted something I would not give them." "Fair enough." Lillian moved to her cutting table and picked up a measuring tape. "Let me take your measurements. You will need to remove your shirt." Owen hesitated, then unbuttoned what remained of his shirt and pulled it carefully over his shoulders, trying not to wince when the movement pulled at his injury. He heard Lillian's sharp intake of breath when she saw the bandage and the bruising spreading from beneath it. "That is more than a graze," she said quietly. "It looks worse than it is. Men always say that." She came closer with her measuring tape, and Owen caught the scent of lavender and something else, maybe rosewater. "Hold still." She worked efficiently, calling out measurements that she wrote down in a small notebook, her fingers occasionally brushing his skin in ways that were purely professional, but made him aware of how long it had been since anyone had touched him with anything other than violence in mind. She measured his shoulders, his chest, the length of his arms, working her way down with practiced ease. "You are broader through the shoulders than most men I make clothes for," she observed. "And your left arm is slightly longer than your right. That happens with cowboys who rope cattle. The repetitive motion develops the muscle differently." "You know cowboys?" Owen asked. "I know fabric and how bodies shape it. My father was a tailor before he passed. He taught me to read people through how they wear their clothes." She moved to measure his waist, her hands professional as she wrapped the tape around him. "You have been working hard your whole life. Your hands have calluses from reins and ropes. You have scars on your ribs from at least 2 other injuries. And you stand like someone expecting trouble, even in a seamstress shop on a peaceful Tuesday afternoon." Owen did not know what to say to that, so he said nothing. Lillian finished her measurements and stepped back. "I can have a shirt and basic trousers ready by Friday if you want them. Or if you can wait until next Tuesday, I can make you a proper Sunday suit, something you could wear to church or a social gathering, something that would make you look like you belong anywhere you wanted to go." "A Sunday suit," Owen repeated, testing the words. He had never owned anything that fancy. His entire life had been spent in work clothes and whatever he could afford or trade for. The idea of owning something fine enough for church seemed almost laughable. "You should have good clothes," Lillian said, and there was something in her voice that sounded like conviction rather than a sales pitch. "Every man should have at least one suit that makes him feel like he is worth something." The words hit harder than Owen expected. He thought about the life he had been living for the past 5 years since he left his family's failing farm in Kansas, drifting from ranch to ranch, taking jobs that paid in cash and required no questions. He thought about how he had been running in one way or another for so long that he had forgotten what it felt like to stand still and be someone other than whoever he needed to be to survive the next day. "All right," he heard himself say. "The Sunday suit. I will wait." Lillian smiled, and it transformed her whole face from merely pretty to genuinely beautiful. Good. I will need half the payment up front, $20 for the full suit, including vest, shirt, and trousers. I will use good wool fabric, dark gray or brown, whichever you prefer, with a cotton shirt and a vest in a complementary color. $20 was more money than Owen should spend when he only had about $60 to his name and no immediate prospects for work, but he found himself nodding. Dark gray, he said, and whatever vest color you think looks right. I think dark blue, Lillian said immediately, already moving to her shelves where the fabric bolts waited. She pulled out a piece of blue fabric that looked almost like the color of a deep twilight sky. This with the gray. It will bring out your eyes. Owen had no idea what color his eyes were beyond, not brown. And he certainly had never considered whether his clothes should complement them. But he watched as Lillian held the fabric up with clear enthusiasm and decided that if she thought it would work, he would trust her judgment. He paid her $10 from the worn leather wallet in his pocket, watching as she wrote out a receipt in careful script. Her handwriting was beautiful, he noticed, the kind that came from proper schooling. She gave him the receipt and told him to come back on Tuesday afternoon for a fitting. One more thing, she said as he turned to leave. There is a church social 2 weeks from Saturday. The whole town attends. If you are still here and looking to meet people properly, it would be a good place to start. Your suit will be ready by then. I am not much for social gatherings, Owen admitted. Neither am I particularly, Lillian said with a slight smile. But in a town this size, people notice when you do not attend, and they make assumptions. Better to show up, eat some pie, and let people see you are respectable than to hide away and have them wonder what you are hiding from. It was good advice, and Owen recognized it as such even if the idea of attending a church social made him want to climb back on his horse and ride for the next county. But he nodded and thanked her before stepping back out into the afternoon sunlight. He found Mrs. Chen's boarding house where Lillian had indicated, and the proprietor, a Chinese woman probably in her 50s with sharp eyes and a no-nonsense manner, looked him over much the same way Lillian had. "Lillian send you?" she asked in accented but clear English. "Yes, madam." "Said you had clean rooms and good food. $3 a week, includes breakfast and dinner. Extra $1 if you want laundry done. No drinking in rooms, no guests after 9 o'clock, no fighting." She looked pointedly at his injury. "And no trouble with the law." "No trouble with the law," Owen confirmed. Mrs. Chen nodded and showed him to a small room on the second floor that was indeed clean, with a real bed, a washstand, and a window that looked out over the street. After she left, Owen sat on the bed and felt the exhaustion of the past week catch up with him all at once. He lay back carefully, mindful of his injury, and stared at the ceiling. He had come to Council Bluffs by accident, just a random town along his flight path that happened to be big enough to get lost in but small enough not to attract the kind of hard cases who had been chasing him. He had not planned to stay more than a night or two. But now he had paid for a week's lodging and commissioned a suit that would not be ready until next Tuesday, which meant at minimum he was staying 10 days. 10 days in one place was longer than Owen had stayed anywhere in the past 2 years. He thought about Lillian Reed and her intelligent green eyes, the way she had assessed him like she was seeing all the parts of him he usually kept hidden. He thought about how she had not called the sheriff despite clearly suspecting he was trouble, and how she had instead directed him to food and shelter, and offered to make him clothes that would help him blend in rather than stand out. Owen fell asleep still thinking about her, and for the first time in months, he slept without dreaming of being chased. The next morning, Owen woke to the smell of frying bacon and fresh bread drifting up from the dining room below. His side ached, but the injury was already starting to heal, and after washing his face and hands in the basin, he made his way downstairs to find several other boarders already seated at a long table. Mrs. Chen brought out plates of eggs, bacon, fried potatoes, and thick slices of bread with butter and jam, and Owen ate until his stomach stopped feeling empty. The other boarders were a mix of traveling salesmen, railroad workers, and one older gentleman who introduced himself as a clerk at the land office. They were friendly in the casual way of people who shared meals but not lives, asking basic questions about where Owen had come from and what brought him to Council Bluffs. He kept his answers vague but polite, saying he was looking for ranch work and had heard there were opportunities in the area. After breakfast, Owen went to check on his horse at the livery stable where he had boarded it the previous afternoon. The animal was in better shape after rest, water, and feed, and the stable owner, a young man named Tommy, assured him the horse would be fine with a few more days of rest. "Looks like you both had a hard journey," Tommy said, running a hand down the horse's foreleg. "But he is sound. Good animal. Quarter horse breeding, looks like." "He has gotten me out of trouble more than once," Owen said. "Well, he deserves the rest then." "You planning to stay in Council Bluffs a while, maybe, looking for work? Try the Reynolds Ranch about 5 miles northwest of town. Big spread, always needs hands, especially coming into summer. Tell them Tommy from the livery sent you. Mr. Reynolds and my father are friends." Owen thanked him for the information and spent the rest of the morning walking around Council Bluffs, getting a feel for the town. It was a decent-sized settlement, benefiting from its position on the Missouri River as a waypoint for travelers and goods heading west. There were the usual establishments: general store, bank, hotel, saloon, blacksmith, and several churches. The streets were busy with people going about their business, and Owen noticed that most folks nodded or said hello even to a stranger, which spoke well of the town's character. He found himself walking past Lillian's shop again around midday, though he had no real reason to stop. Through the window, he could see her working at her cutting table, head bent over a piece of fabric she was marking with chalk. She looked completely absorbed in her work, and something about the scene, the peaceful domesticity of it, made Owen's chest feel tight. He kept walking, not wanting to disturb her or seem strange by returning so soon, and made his way to the general store where he bought some basic supplies: tobacco for rolling cigarettes, a bar of soap, a new shirt that actually fit, and some salve for his injury that the store owner's wife recommended. "You are new in town," the woman said as she wrapped his purchases. She was middle-aged and motherly with a round face and curious eyes. "Passing through or staying? Not sure yet," Owen said honestly. "Depends on whether I can find work." "Well, we can always use good people in Council Bluffs. You should come to the church social 2 weeks from Saturday. Good way to meet folks." It was the second time someone had mentioned the church social, and Owen wondered if it was some kind of local obsession or if the town just really enjoyed social gatherings. He made a non-committal sound and took his packages, heading back to the boarding house. The next few days fell into a routine. Owen ate Mrs. Chen's cooking, walked around town, and on Thursday rode out to the Reynolds Ranch to inquire about work. Mr. Reynolds was a weathered man in his 50s who looked Owen over with the shrewd eye of someone who had hired and fired 100 cowboys. "You know cattle?" Reynolds asked. "Yes, sir. Worked ranches in Kansas and Nebraska. Can rope, brand, and break horses if needed." "Tommy at the livery says you are solid. That counts for something. I need hands for the summer drive and general ranch work. Pay is $30 a month plus meals when you are working. You stay in the bunkhouse with the other hands." No drinking on the job, no fighting, and you do what the foreman tells you. When do I start? Monday. Be here at dawn. Owen rode back to Council Bluffs feeling like things were falling into place in a way they had not in years. He had work, a place to stay, and nobody shooting at him. The town was peaceful, the people were decent. And for the first time since he was a boy, Owen let himself think about what it might be like to stay somewhere long enough to actually build a life rather than just survive. Friday afternoon found him back at Lillian's shop for what she called a preliminary fitting. She had already constructed the basic structure of the suit, and he tried on the trousers and the partially assembled jacket so she could make adjustments. "How does it feel?" she asked, circling him with pins in her mouth and a critical eye on the way the fabric hung. "Strange," Owen admitted. "I am not used to clothes that fit this well." "That is the point of having things made rather than buying ready-made." She pinned something at his shoulder. "You should feel comfortable and look good. Both are possible if someone takes the time to do it right." "Where did you learn all this?" "You said your father taught you." Lillian nodded, her fingers working efficiently to mark adjustments. "He was a master tailor in Chicago. We moved here 5 years ago when my mother got sick, hoping the change of climate might help her. It did not. She passed within a year. My father kept working, taught me everything he knew, and then he died 2 years ago from pneumonia. I took over the business." "I am sorry," Owen said, meaning it. "That must have been hard." "It was, but I had the shop and I had his teaching, and that gave me purpose. People need clothes. I know how to make them. It is a fair trade." She stepped back to look at him, arms out to the side. He raised his arms and she measured and marked, her face focused. "What about you?" she asked. "Do you have family, parents, and a younger sister in Kansas?" "Farm failed 6 years ago. Father sold what was left and moved them to Missouri to live with my mother's brother. I send money when I can, but mostly I just drift." "That sounds lonely." Owen had never thought of it that way before. Lonely implied missing something, wanting connection, and he had spent so long just focused on survival that he had not considered whether he was lonely. But standing there in Lillian's shop, wearing the beginning of a fine suit while she worked around him with careful attention, he realized that maybe he had been lonely and just had not let himself acknowledge it. "I suppose it is," he said quietly. Lillian looked up at him, and their eyes met for a long moment. Owen saw something in her expression that looked like understanding, like recognition. Maybe she had been lonely too, running a shop by herself in a town where she had no family, making clothes for other people's important occasions while having none of her own. "Turn around," she said, breaking the moment, and he did, feeling her mark something on the back of the jacket. "This will be beautiful when it is finished. You will look like someone important." "I am just a cowboy," Owen said. "There is no just about honest work," Lillian replied firmly. "Being a cowboy is honorable. But that does not mean you cannot also be someone who wears a fine suit and goes to church socials and has a life beyond work." He thought about that as she finished marking the adjustments, and he changed back into his regular clothes. When he left the shop, he carried with him the idea that maybe he could be more than what he had been, that maybe staying in Council Bluffs was not just a temporary safety measure, but an actual opportunity to build something. The days until Tuesday stretched and contracted strangely. Owen started work at the Reynolds Ranch on Monday and found the labor both familiar and satisfying. The other ranch hands were a decent group, mostly young men in their 20s and early 30s, with a few older cowboys who had been working ranches their whole lives. They accepted Owen easily once they saw he knew what he was doing, and the foreman, a lean man named Jack with a scar across his chin, told him he was welcome to stay on through the fall if he wanted. Tuesday afternoon, Owen rode back to town still dusty from work, but eager to see the finished suit. The bell chimed when he entered Lillian's shop, and she emerged from the back with a smile that made his pulse quicken in a way that had nothing to do with physical exertion. "Perfect timing," she said. "I just finished the final pressing. Come see." She led him to the back room where a full-length mirror stood, and there, hanging on a form, was the most beautiful suit of clothes Owen had ever seen. The dark gray wool looked soft and rich, perfectly tailored to the measurements she had taken. The blue vest was exactly the color she had shown him, and together with the crisp white shirt, the whole ensemble looked like something a banker or a successful merchant might wear. "Go ahead, try it on," Lillian encouraged. Owen changed behind a privacy screen, and when he emerged and saw himself in the mirror, he barely recognized his own reflection. The man looking back at him stood straighter, looked more solid, more real somehow. The suit fit perfectly, not too tight but showing his build, the shoulders sitting just right, the trousers breaking at exactly the correct point on his boots. "Well," Lillian asked, and he could hear the anticipation in her voice. "I look like a different person," Owen said honestly. "No," she corrected, coming to stand beside him in the mirror. "You look like yourself, just properly presented. There is a difference." Owen turned to look at her directly rather than through the reflection. She was smiling up at him, clearly pleased with her work, and he was suddenly very aware of how close they were standing. "Thank you," he said. "This is incredible. I have never owned anything this nice." "You should wear it to the church social on Saturday," Lillian said. "It would be a shame for something this beautiful to sit in a closet. Will you be there?" The question came out before Owen had fully thought it through. "I always attend. As I said, people notice if you do not. Would you sit with me?" "I mean, I do not know anyone there, and you have been kind in helping me settle here, and I thought maybe." Owen trailed off, realizing he was fumbling the words badly. He had faced down charging cattle and armed bandits with more composure than he was managing in asking a woman to sit with him at a social gathering, but Lillian's smile widened. "I would like that," she said simply. The church social was held in the yard beside the white clapboard church on the north end of town. Owen arrived on Saturday evening wearing his new suit and feeling more nervous than he had felt in years. Long tables had been set up under the cottonwood trees, covered with dishes brought by every family in attendance. Fried chicken, roasted vegetables, fresh bread, pies, cakes, and everything else that made up a proper community feast. He spotted Lillian almost immediately. She wore a green dress that matched her eyes, with her auburn hair partially down rather than in its usual practical bun. She looked beautiful in a way that made his mouth go dry, and when she saw him and smiled, he felt like the luckiest man in Iowa. "You clean up very well," she said when he reached her side. "The suit makes all the difference," Owen replied. "I owe that to you." "It is not just the suit," Lillian said. But before Owen could figure out what she meant by that, they were swept up into the social whirl as various townspeople came to introduce themselves to the newcomer. There was Sheriff Miller, a tall man with gray in his beard and a careful way of looking at people that Owen recognized from other lawmen he had encountered. But Miller was friendly enough. Once Owen explained he was working at the Reynolds Ranch, and he moved on after shaking hands. There were the Thompsons who ran the general store, Mrs. Chen from the boarding house with her grown son and daughter-in-law, Tommy from the livery with his parents, and dozens of other families whose names Owen tried to remember but knew he would likely forget. Everyone was welcoming in the particular way of small towns where newcomers were rare, and anyone who seemed respectable was welcomed into the community fold quickly. Through it all, Lillian stayed near him, making introductions smoother with her presence, occasionally adding context that helped Owen understand the social landscape. She knew everyone, and they knew her, and he realized that, despite her claim of not being particularly social, she was actually well-liked and respected in the community. They filled plates with food and found seats at one of the long tables. The evening air was warm and pleasant, and as the sun began to set, someone brought out a fiddle and another person produced a guitar, and soon music filled the air. "Do you dance?" Lillian asked as couples began to move to an open area that had been left clear for that purpose. "Not well," Owen admitted, "but I can try not to step on your feet too badly." She laughed and took his hand, and they joined the other couples. Owen had not been entirely honest because he actually could dance reasonably well. His mother had insisted he and his sister learn when they were younger, saying that any respectable person should be able to conduct themselves properly at a dance. But he had not danced in years, and never with someone who made him as nervous and excited as Lillian did. They moved through a simple waltz, and Owen found that some things came back naturally once you stopped overthinking them. Lillian was light on her feet and easy to lead, and after a few minutes, he relaxed enough to actually enjoy the experience rather than just trying not to embarrass himself. "You said you could not dance well," Lillian said, amusement in her voice. "You lied." "I said not well. This is not well, this is just adequate. You are too modest." They danced through 2 more songs, before taking a break to rest and drink some of the lemonade that had been set out in large pitchers. Owen found himself laughing more than he had in months, maybe years, as Lillian told him stories about various townspeople and the small dramas that made up life in Council Bluffs. As the evening wore on and the sky darkened to full night with stars beginning to appear, Owen realized he was happier than he could remember being. Not just content or surviving, but genuinely happy. And it was not just the town or the job or even the fine suit he was wearing. It was Lillian. The way she smiled at him like he was someone worth smiling at. The way she listened when he talked and seemed genuinely interested in what he had to say. The way her hand felt in his when they danced. They were standing slightly apart from the main gathering, near one of the tables, when Owen made a decision that felt both terrifying and absolutely right. "Lillian, I need to tell you something," he started, then stopped because he had no idea how to continue. She looked at him with those intelligent green eyes, patient and curious. "What is it?" "When I came to Council Bluffs, I was running. Not from the law like I told you, but from men who wanted to rob me. I won a significant amount of money in a card game, fair and square, but they did not see it that way. I have been drifting for years, never staying anywhere long, always just moving to the next job, the next town. I never thought about stopping because I never had a reason to." He took a breath, aware she was listening intently. "But being here, in this town, working at the ranch and especially getting to know you, I realized I want to stop running. I want to stay somewhere and build something real. And I know we have only known each other for 2 weeks, which is not long at all, but I feel like I have known you longer. Like you see me in a way most people do not bother to." Lillian's expression had softened as he spoke, and when he paused, she reached out and took his hand. "I see you," she said quietly. "I saw you that first day when you walked into my shop looking like you had been through a war. I saw someone who was tired and hurt but still standing, still trying. And every time I have seen you since, I see someone who is kind and honest and trying to be better than what life has made him. I do not have much to offer," Owen continued, feeling like now that he had started, he needed to finish. "I make $30 a month at the ranch. I have maybe $50 saved, and I own a horse, a saddle, and this suit you made me. But I have a job I am good at, and I am willing to work as hard as needed to build a life here. And I want to know if maybe, someday, that life could include you." It was not a proposal. Not exactly, because Owen knew 2 weeks was too soon for that, and Lillian deserved to be courted properly, not rushed. But it was a declaration of intention, a statement of hope, and as he said the words, he felt lighter, like he had been carrying something heavy for years and had finally set it down. Lillian did not answer immediately. She looked at their joined hands, then up at his face, and Owen could see her thinking, weighing, considering. He waited, barely breathing, aware that everything he wanted was balanced on whatever she said next. "Owen Dalton," she said finally, and hearing his full name from her lips made his heart race. "I have lived in this town for 5 years. In that time I have had a dozen men court me or try to. Some were nice enough, some were persistent, some were wealthy. I turned them all down because none of them saw me. They saw a seamstress who could make their clothes and keep their house. They saw someone respectable to marry because they needed a wife. But not one of them looked at me the way you do, like I am someone worth knowing rather than just someone worth having." She squeezed his hand. "I do not need much either. I have my shop, my skills, and a little house my father left me behind the shop where I live. I make enough money to support myself, and I am not looking for someone to rescue me or take care of me. But I would like someone to share my life with. Someone who understands what it is like to work hard and to value simple, honest things. Someone who makes me laugh and who I want to talk to at the end of the day." "Could I be that person?" Owen asked, his voice rough. "I think you already are," Lillian said, and then she was smiling and Owen felt like the sky had opened up and poured light directly into his chest. They stayed at the social until it began to break up around 10 o'clock, and Owen walked Lillian home through the quiet streets. Her house was indeed behind her shop, a small but neat structure with a front porch and flower boxes in the windows. They stood on her porch, neither quite ready to say goodnight. "I would like to court you properly," Owen said. "Call on you, take you to dinner, whatever is appropriate. I do not want anyone in this town to think I am not treating you with respect." "I would like that too," Lillian said. "Maybe Sunday dinner after church. I usually cook for myself, but I could cook for two just as easily." "I would be honored." There was a moment when Owen thought about kissing her, when the air between them felt charged with possibility, but he held back. Too soon, too fast, and Lillian deserved to be courted slowly and properly. So instead, he raised her hand to his lips and kissed her knuckles like a gentleman in one of the books his mother used to read. "Good night, Lillian." "Good night, Owen. Thank you for a wonderful evening." He walked back to the boarding house feeling like he was floating, and when he lay in bed that night, he thought about the future for the first time in years with something other than vague uncertainty. He thought about seasons passing, about working the ranch and saving money, about Sunday dinners with Lillian and dances at church socials. He thought about what it would be like to belong somewhere to someone, and to have them belong to him in return. The next morning, Owen attended church for the first time in longer than he could remember. He sat in the back pew wearing his Sunday suit and watched Lillian sit 3 rows ahead with some of the other unmarried women from town. When she turned and smiled at him, he smiled back, feeling like maybe God or fate or whatever guided the universe had led him to Council Bluffs for a reason. After the service, they walked together back to her house, and she cooked dinner while he sat at her kitchen table and talked about the ranch work, about the other cowboys, about the plans Mr. Reynolds had for expanding his herd. Lillian told him about her current projects, about a wedding dress she was making for a young woman from a neighboring town, about the new fabrics she had ordered from Chicago. It was the most domestic thing Owen had ever experienced, and it felt right in a way that made him wonder how he had lived without it for so long. Over the following weeks, they fell into a routine. Owen worked at the ranch during the week, long days of hard labor under the summer sun. On Sundays, he attended church and had dinner with Lillian. Some evenings when he got back to town early enough, he would stop by her shop, and she would make tea and they would sit on her porch and talk until it got dark. The town accepted their courtship without fanfare, and Owen realized that people had probably been hoping Lillian would find someone. She was well liked, and a town like Council Bluffs valued stability and happiness for its members. The fact that Owen was proving himself to be a hard worker and a decent man only helped matters. One evening in mid-July, about a month after they had started courting, Owen sat on Lillian's porch swing while she worked on some embroidery beside him. The evening was warm and fireflies were beginning to appear in the growing darkness. "I have been thinking about something," Owen said, watching the fireflies dance. "What is that?" "About building. About the future." He turned to look at her. "I know we have only been courting a short while, but I am 30 years old, Lillian. I spent my 20s drifting and surviving, and I do not want to waste any more time. I want to build a real life, and I want to build it with you." Lillian set down her embroidery and looked at him seriously. "What are you saying?" "I am saying that by the end of summer, I will have saved nearly $100 beyond what I need for basic living. Mr. Reynolds said if I stay on through fall, I can work as a full-time hand at $40 a month because I have proven myself. I spoke to the land office, and there is property available for purchase or homesteading not far from here. I could build a house, start building a life that is more than just working for someone else's ranch." He took her hand. "And I know it is not much, not yet, but it could be. With time and work, it could be a real home, and I want that home to be for both of us. I want to marry you, Lillian. I want to wake up next to you every morning and come home to you every night. I want to build something that lasts." Lillian's eyes had grown shiny with tears, but she was smiling. "Yes," she said simply. "Yes to all of it. Yes to marrying you and building a home and a life together. Yes." Owen pulled her close and kissed her then, really kissed her for the first time. She tasted like the tea they had been drinking and something sweet, maybe the cookies she had made earlier. Her lips were soft, and she made a small sound of happiness against his mouth that made his heart feel too big for his chest. When they pulled apart, both slightly breathless, Lillian laughed and wiped at her eyes. "We should do this properly," she said. "You should ask my permission formally, maybe give me a ring. People will expect certain things." "I do not have a ring yet," Owen admitted, "but I can get one. And I do not have your father to ask, but is there anyone else I should speak to, an uncle or family friend?" Lillian shook her head. "I am alone in the world except for some distant cousins I have not seen in years. But you could ask Pastor Williams for his blessing. He has been kind to me since my father died, and it would be respectful." So the next Sunday, Owen spoke to Pastor Williams after the service, a balding man in his 50s with kind eyes and a firm handshake. Owen explained his intentions, his circumstances, and his hopes for the future. The pastor listened carefully, asked several thoughtful questions about Owen's faith and his plans for supporting a family, and then gave his blessing with apparent sincerity. "Lillian is a good woman," Pastor Williams said. "She has had a hard few years, losing both parents and running that business alone. She deserves someone who will cherish her and build a life with her. You seem like a solid man, Owen. Treat her well." "I will, sir. I promise you that." Owen bought a simple gold band from the jeweler in town, spending more than he probably should have, but wanting Lillian to have something that would last. That evening, he went to her house and formally proposed, getting down on one knee in her small living room while she stood with her hands over her mouth and tears streaming down her face. "Lillian Reed, will you marry me?" he asked, holding out the ring. "Yes," she said again, just like she had on the porch. But this time it was official and binding in a way that made Owen feel like his life had finally clicked into the pattern it was always meant to follow. They set the wedding date for late September, after the fall harvest work was done, but before the weather turned cold. That gave them 2 months to prepare, and Lillian threw herself into making her own wedding dress with the same careful attention she brought to all her work. Owen saved every penny he could and made plans with Mr. Reynolds to transition to full-time work after the wedding. The town was excited about the wedding in the way small towns got excited about such things. Women brought Lillian fabric and lace and offered advice. Men clapped Owen on the shoulder and made jokes about married life. Mrs. Chen insisted on hosting the wedding dinner at her boarding house, refusing to take no for an answer. During those 2 months, Owen felt like he was living in a dream. He worked hard at the ranch during the day, but he did so knowing that every dollar earned was going toward building a future with Lillian. In the evenings and on Sundays, they made plans for their life together. They looked at land parcels and dreamed about the house they would build. They talked about how they would combine her income from the seamstress shop with his ranch wages, until they had enough saved to buy cattle of their own. One August evening, they sat together on her porch swing, and Lillian leaned her head against his shoulder in a way that had become comfortable and familiar over the past months. "Are you scared?" she asked quietly. "Of what?" "Of marriage. Of committing to staying in one place with one person for the rest of your life. You spent so long running and being free. Are you scared you will regret it?" Owen thought about the question seriously because Lillian deserved honest answers. "No," he said finally. "I am not scared of that. I was not running because I loved being free. I was running because I did not have anywhere I wanted to stay. And freedom when you have nowhere to go and no one to be with is not really freedom at all. It is just loneliness with extra steps." He felt her smile against his shoulder. "That is a very philosophical answer for a cowboy. I've had a lot of time to think over the years. Herding cattle does not require much mental engagement." He shifted so he could look at her. "What about you? Are you scared?" "A little," Lillian admitted. "Not of you or of marrying you, but of hoping for too much. I have learned to be content with what I have, with my work and my little house and my quiet life. Now I am hoping for so much more, and that makes me vulnerable in a way I have not been in a long time. If something goes wrong, if I lose you somehow, I do not know if I could survive it again." "You will not lose me," Owen said firmly. "I am not going anywhere. I have spent my whole adult life moving from place to place, and I am done with that. This is where I stop, with you, for good." The wedding took place on a clear September morning with the leaves just beginning to turn gold and red. Lillian wore a dress of ivory silk that she had spent weeks perfecting, with delicate lace at the collar and cuffs. Her hair was pinned up with flowers, and she carried a small bouquet of wildflowers that Mrs. Chen's daughter-in-law had gathered that morning. Owen wore his Sunday suit, the dark gray wool and blue vest that had been the beginning of everything between them. He stood at the front of the church with his hands clasped to keep them from shaking and watched Lillian walk down the aisle toward him. She was the most beautiful thing he had ever seen. Pastor Williams performed the ceremony with warmth and dignity, speaking about commitment and faith and the building of a life together. When it came time for the vows, Owen spoke as clearly and firmly, meaning every word. Lillian's voice was softer but just as certain. "I do," she said, and Owen slipped the gold band onto her finger. "I do," he said when it was his turn, and Lillian placed a matching band she had bought on his finger. "I now pronounce you husband and wife," Pastor Williams said with a smile. "You may kiss your bride." Owen had kissed Lillian many times over the past months, but this kiss was different. This kiss was a promise kept and a future sealed, and when they pulled apart, they were both smiling so widely their faces hurt. The wedding dinner at Mrs. Chen's boarding house was a boisterous affair with half the town in attendance. There was food and laughter and music, and at one point, Tommy from the livery stood up and made a toast that was both funny and surprisingly touching. "To Owen and Lillian," he said, raising his glass. "May they have a long and happy life together. May their house always be filled with love and laughter. And may they never forget that sometimes the best things in life come from taking a chance on something new." Everyone drank to that, and Owen looked at his wife, still getting used to the word, and knew that taking a chance on staying in Council Bluffs had been the best decision he had ever made. They spent their wedding night in Lillian's little house, which was now Owen's house too, and for the first time in his life, Owen felt like he had truly come home. Not to a place, though the house was nice enough, but to a person. To Lillian, who knew all his rough edges and chose to love him anyway. In the days and weeks that followed, they settled into married life with surprising ease. Owen continued working at the Reynolds Ranch while Lillian maintained her seamstress business. They saved money diligently, planning for the day when they could buy land and build their own place. But they were also learning how to be married, how to share space and decisions and life in all its mundane and extraordinary moments. Owen learned that Lillian sang quietly to herself when she worked, and that she was grumpy in the mornings until she had her coffee. Lillian learned that Owen was better at cooking than she expected, and that he had a habit of reading the newspaper out loud without realizing he was doing it. They had their first argument about 6 weeks into the marriage, something silly about whether they needed new curtains for the bedroom. It escalated because both of them were tired and stressed about money, and it ended with Owen storming out to the barn to brush down his horse for the 3rd time that week, while Lillian stayed inside fuming. But an hour later, Owen came back inside and found Lillian sitting at the kitchen table with tears on her cheeks. "I am sorry," he said immediately, crossing to kneel beside her chair. "You are right about the curtains, and even if you were not right, it is not worth fighting over." "I am sorry too," Lillian said, wiping at her eyes. "I think I was more upset about other things and took it out on you over something that does not matter." They held each other for a long time, and Owen realized that this, too, was part of marriage. The fights and the making up, the learning how to navigate conflict without letting it destroy what you had built together. It was not always easy, but it was worth it. Winter came to Iowa with snow and cold winds, and Owen was grateful for the snug little house and the warm body beside him in bed each night. Work at the ranch slowed during the winter months, but Mr. Reynolds kept Owen on for reduced hours, having him help with equipment repairs and winter feeding. Christmas was their first major holiday as a married couple, and Lillian insisted on making it special despite their limited budget. She cooked a feast that seemed impossibly large for just 2 people, and they exchanged modest gifts. Owen gave Lillian a new pair of scissors from Chicago that were supposed to be the best for fabric cutting. Lillian gave Owen a set of leather riding gloves she had made herself, with his initials tooled into the cuffs. "I love you," Owen said as they sat by the fire that evening, full of good food and contentment. "I do not say it enough, but I do. You are the best thing that ever happened to me." "I love you too," Lillian said, snuggling closer to him on the small sofa. "And I think you say it plenty. You say it every time you come home tired from work and still ask about my day. Every time you fix something around the house without me having to ask. Every time you look at me like I am something precious. Words are nice, but actions count for more. By the time spring arrived again, they had saved nearly $300, a significant sum that represented months of careful budgeting and sacrifice. They began seriously looking at land, riding out on Sundays to survey different parcels that were available for purchase. They finally settled on a beautiful piece of property about 3 miles from town, 40 acres with a small creek running through it, and enough good grazing land to support a starter herd of cattle. The price was reasonable, and after negotiating with the land office, they bought it outright in early April of 1879, almost exactly 1 year after Owen had first walked into Lillian's shop. "This is ours," Lillian said, standing on their land and looking around with wonder. "Really ours. No landlord, no renting. This is our home." "This is where we build our future," Owen agreed, pulling her close. "This is where everything starts." They spent that spring and summer building a house, with Owen doing most of the physical labor and Lillian helping whenever she could take time away from the shop. Several men from town, including Tommy and some of Owen's fellow ranch hands, came out on Sundays to help, making the work go faster. By late summer, they had a small but solid house with 2 bedrooms, a kitchen, a living area, and a real porch where they could sit in the evenings. It was not fancy, but it was well built and it was theirs. They moved in on a hot August day, carrying their modest belongings from Lillian's old house to their new home. That night, they sat on their new porch and watched the sun set over their land, and Owen felt a satisfaction deeper than anything he had known before. He had built this with his own hands. He had created something lasting and real, and he had someone to share it with who understood and appreciated what it meant. "Next spring, we should get cattle," Lillian said, her head resting on his shoulder. "Nothing too ambitious at first. Maybe 10 head to start, and we can grow from there." "And you will keep the seamstress shop?" Owen asked. "For now, yes. The income helps and I enjoy the work. Maybe someday when we are more established, I can be more selective about what projects I take on, but for now I can manage both." They were quiet for a moment, then Lillian said, "I think I might be pregnant." Owen went very still. "You think or you know?" "I am fairly certain. I have missed my monthly courses and I have been feeling sick in the mornings. It is still early, but all the signs are there." Owen pulled back to look at her face, searching for clues about how she felt about this development. "How do you feel about that?" "Terrified," Lillian admitted, "and excited, and worried about 100 different things, but also happy, I think. Are you happy?" "I am beyond happy," Owen said honestly. "I am completely overwhelmed in the best possible way. We are going to have a baby." "We are going to have a baby," Lillian repeated. And then she was laughing and crying at the same time, and Owen was holding her and feeling like his heart might burst from how much love it was trying to contain. Their son was born in March of 1880 on a cold morning when the last snow of winter was still on the ground. The labor was long and difficult, and Owen paced outside the bedroom where Mrs. Chen and 2 other women from town were helping Lillian through the birth. When he finally heard the baby's cry, he nearly collapsed with relief. Mrs. Chen came out wiping her hands on her apron, smiling tiredly. "You have a healthy son," she said. "And Lillian is fine. Exhausted, but fine. You can go in now." Owen entered the bedroom to find Lillian propped up in bed, looking pale and tired but radiantly happy. In her arms was a tiny bundle wrapped in blankets, and when Owen came closer, he saw his son's face for the first time. "He is perfect," Owen whispered, hardly daring to breathe. "He is ours," Lillian said. "Our son. What should we name him?" They had discussed names over the past months but had never quite settled on anything. Now, looking at his son's face, Owen thought about his own father who had tried so hard to keep the family together through difficult times, and about Lillian's father who had taught her everything and left her with a skill that had saved her life. Oliver, Owen suggested. Oliver David. After both our fathers. Oliver David Dalton, Lillian said, testing the name. I like it. Hello, Oliver. Welcome to the world. The baby made a small sound, and Owen felt something shift fundamentally in his chest. This was his son. This tiny person was depending on him and Lillian to keep him safe and fed and loved. It was a responsibility that felt enormous, but Owen knew he was ready for it. He had spent so much of his life running from responsibility, but now all he wanted was to embrace it fully. The first year of Oliver's life was simultaneously the hardest and happiest year of Owen's life. The baby woke frequently at night, needing to be fed or changed or simply held. Money was tight as Lillian had to reduce her seamstress work to care for Oliver, meaning they were more dependent on Owen's ranch wages. The house needed constant upkeep, Oliver needed constant attention, and both Owen and Lillian were frequently exhausted, but there were also moments of pure joy. Oliver's first smile, which came at about 6 weeks old. His first laugh, a delightful gurgle that made both parents laugh in return. The way he would reach for Owen when Owen came home from work, tiny hands grasping at his father's face. The peaceful quiet of rocking Oliver to sleep while Lillian hummed lullabies. By Oliver's first birthday, they had settled into a rhythm that worked. Lillian had hired a young woman from town to help with childcare during the days, allowing her to resume more of her seamstress work. Owen had been promoted to a lead hand position at the Reynolds Ranch, bringing in $50 a month. They had purchased 6 head of cattle of their own, which grazed on their land and represented the beginning of their own herd. Life was not easy, but it was good. It was real. It was everything Owen had never known he wanted until he found it. One evening in early spring of 1881, Owen sat on the porch with Oliver on his lap while Lillian worked on mending a shirt beside them. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, and in the distance, Owen could see their small herd grazing peacefully. "You ever regret it?" Lillian asked quietly. "Settling down, being tied to one place, having all these responsibilities." Owen looked at his son, who was playing with a wooden horse Owen had carved for him. He looked at his wife, her face beautiful in the evening light. He looked at their house, their land, the life they had built together over the past 3 years. "Not for a single second," he said honestly. "Everything I was before I came to Council Bluffs was just preparation for this. For you and Oliver and this life we have made. I spent so long thinking freedom meant having no ties, no commitments, no one depending on me. But I was wrong. This is freedom. Knowing where I belong and who I belong with, having people to love and work for and build with. This is what I was always supposed to find." Lillian reached over and took his hand. "I feel the same way. Sometimes I think about how lonely I was before you, and I cannot imagine going back to that. You and Oliver are my whole world." "We should have more," Owen said suddenly. "More children, I mean. Oliver should have siblings. And this house is big enough, we have the land, and I think we could manage it. Are you sure? It has been exhausting just with one. I am sure." "I want a big family, Lillian. I want this house full of life and noise and love. I want our children to grow up knowing they are part of something good and solid. I want to give them everything I never had." Lillian smiled. "Then let us have more children, as many as come along. We will make it work." Their daughter arrived in late 1881, a tiny thing with red hair like her mother and lungs that could wake the entire house. They named her Emma Rose, and she was both easier and harder than Oliver had been. Easier because they now had some experience with babies. Harder because they had 2 children instead of 1, and Oliver was at an age where he required constant supervision to keep him from getting into trouble. But they managed, just as they had managed everything else. Owen continued working at the ranch while also building up their own small cattle operation. Lillian balanced her seamstress work with raising 2 young children, relying on help from neighbors and the young woman she employed. The house that had seemed spacious when it was just the 2 of them now felt comfortably full of life. More children followed over the years. Another son in 1883, whom they named James after Lillian's father. Twin daughters in 1885, Alice and Caroline, who looked identical and immediately developed their own private language that no one else could understand. And finally, another son in 1887, whom they named Samuel, rounding out their family at 6 children. The Dalton household was loud and chaotic and constantly busy. Owen expanded their house twice to accommodate the growing family, adding bedrooms and extending the kitchen. Their cattle herd grew to nearly 50 head, and Owen was able to transition to working their own ranch full-time rather than hiring out to Reynolds, though he and Mr. Reynolds remained friends. Lillian continued her seamstress work, but became more selective, taking only special projects that interested her and paid well. She taught her daughters to sew, passing on the skills her father had taught her. She taught her sons to be gentle and respectful, to see women as equals rather than servants. The years passed in a blur of school days and harvest seasons, of birthdays and Christmases and church socials. Oliver grew into a serious young man who loved working with cattle like his father. Emma was spirited and independent, already announcing at age 7 that she planned to be a doctor someday. Consequences to anyone who said girls could not do such things be damned. James was quiet and thoughtful, preferring books to outdoor work, but never complaining when asked to help. The twins were inseparable and mischievous, constantly plotting elaborate pranks that drove everyone else to distraction, but were too clever to stay angry at. And Samuel was the baby, spoiled by everyone and knowing it, ruling the household with his charming smile and complete lack of shame about using it to get what he wanted. Through it all, Owen and Lillian remained at the center, the foundation on which everything else was built. They still sat on their porch in the evenings when they could steal a moment of peace, still talked about their days and their dreams, still looked at each other with the same love that had brought them together in the first place. One evening in 1890, when Oliver was 10 and Samuel was 3, and the house was finally quiet after the chaos of getting 6 children fed and bathed and put to bed, Owen and Lillian sat on their porch swing and watched the stars come out. "Do you remember the church social where I wore this suit for the first time?" Owen asked, gesturing to the gray wool jacket he still owned, though it was now relegated to only the most special occasions and was getting worn in places. "Of course, I remember. That was the night everything changed." "I was going to propose to you that night," Owen admitted. "I had it all planned out. I was going to ask you to dance, then after the music stopped, I was going to get down on one knee right there in front of everyone and ask you to marry me." Lillian turned to look at him in surprise. "You never told me that. What stopped you?" "Fear, mostly. I realized that 2 weeks was not long enough, that you deserved to be courted properly rather than rushed, that if I proposed so fast, people might think I was not serious or that there was some hidden reason for the hurry. So I waited, did it the right way, and I am glad I did." He smiled at her. "But I wanted to propose that night. I knew even then that you were the one." "I knew too," Lillian said softly, "from almost the first moment, really." When you walked into my shop looking like you had been through a war, and you asked for a Sunday suit like it was the most important thing in the world. I saw someone who wanted to be better than what circumstances had made him, someone who was trying, and I thought, this is a man worth knowing. That suit changed my life, Owen said. It made me feel like I could be someone worth something, like I could walk into that church social and belong there, like I could be the kind of man who deserved someone like you. You were always that man, Lillian said firmly. The suit just helped you see it yourself. They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, then Owen said, the suit is getting worn out. Maybe someday our sons will need Sunday suits of their own. Oliver is getting close to an age where he might start courting, and James is not far behind. I will make them suits when the time comes, Lillian promised. Though nothing will be quite as special as yours, that one changed both our lives. You think our children understand how lucky they are? Owen asked. To have this life, this home, this family. Some of them do, some of them do not yet. But they will. When they are older and have seen more of the world, they will understand. They will know that what we have built here is rare and precious. Lillian leaned her head on his shoulder. We did good, Owen. We built something real and lasting. Whatever else happens, we did that. Owen wrapped his arm around his wife and looked out at the land they had worked so hard to make their own. The house they had built with their own hands, the cattle grazing in the fields, the children sleeping peacefully inside. 13 years ago, he had been running for his life, alone and desperate, with no clear future beyond surviving one more day. Now he had everything he had never known how to hope for. I love you, he said, the words as true now as they had been the first time he said them. Thank you for seeing me when I could not see myself. Thank you for taking a chance on a drifter cowboy with nothing but a horse and a dream. Thank you for building this life with me. I love you too, Lillian said, and I would do it all again in a heartbeat. Every hard day, every struggle, every challenge, it was all worth it to end up here. The years continued to pass as years do. The children grew up one by one. Oliver did indeed start courting at 16, a nice girl from a neighboring ranch, and Lillian made him a Sunday suit that was handsome, but could never quite match the significance of the one she had made for his father. Emma went off to a women's medical college back east, determined to make her childhood dream come true, despite all the obstacles in her path. James became a teacher at the local schoolhouse. The twins married brothers from a family 2 towns over in a joint ceremony that was the social event of the year. Samuel took over running the ranch, having inherited his father's love of cattle and his mother's head for business. Owen and Lillian grew older together, their hair going gray, their movements becoming slower, but their love remaining as steady and strong as ever. They became grandparents, then great-grandparents. The house that had once been filled with their own children now regularly filled with the next generations. On a warm spring evening in 1920, 42 years after they had first met, Owen and Lillian sat on their porch, now both in their 70s, but still insisting on maintaining their evening ritual. The house was quiet, just the two of them for once, as all the children and grandchildren were busy with their own lives. You remember when we first bought this land? Lillian asked. How empty it was, just grass and sky and that little creek. I remember thinking it was the most beautiful thing I had ever seen, Owen said. Until I looked at you and realized you were more beautiful than any piece of land could ever be. Flatterer, truth-teller. Owen took her hand, feeling how her fingers had become thin and spotted with age but were still the same hands that had measured him for his Sunday suit all those years ago. I would not change a single thing about this life we built together, not one moment of it, not even the hard parts. The times we fought or struggled or were not sure we would make it through, especially not those parts. They made us who we are. They taught us how to be strong together instead of just individually. Owen squeezed her hand gently. Every moment led us here to this porch, with 6 children raised and married, 14 grandchildren, 3 great-grandchildren so far, and more than 4 decades of memories. That is a good life, Lillian. That is a life worth living. It is, she agreed softly. It really is. They sat in peaceful silence, as the sun set over the land they had built their life on. 2 people who had found each other against all odds and created something beautiful and lasting. The seamstress and the cowboy, who had met by chance but stayed together by choice, who had weathered every storm and celebrated every joy as partners in every sense of the word. Inside the house, the gray wool Sunday suit hung in a place of honor in a glass-fronted cabinet Owen had built years ago. The fabric was worn thin in places, the blue vest faded by time, but it remained as a testament to beginnings, to transformation, to the moment when Owen Dalton had walked into a church social wearing clothes that made him feel worthy, and had decided to build a life rather than keep running. That suit had been the beginning of everything. And as Owen sat on the porch with Lillian's hand in his, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of gold and amber, he thought about how one decision to stay, to try, to hope, could change the entire course of a life. "I love you," he said again, because some words never got old or less true no matter how many times they were spoken. "I love you too," Lillian replied, and in those simple words was contained the weight of more than 4 decades of shared life, of struggles overcome and joys celebrated, of a family raised and a future secured, of 2 people who had found each other in the wild spaces of the American West and had built something that would outlast them both. As the stars began to appear in the darkening sky, Owen Dalton, former drifter and cowboy, now husband and father and grandfather, felt a contentment so deep it seemed to settle into his very bones. He had spent the first 30 years of his life searching for something without knowing what it was. And then he had walked into a seamstress shop in Council Bluffs, Iowa, bloody and desperate and hopeful, and he had found it. He had found home. He had found love. He had found himself. And all because a seamstress had taken the time to make him a Sunday suit that fit perfectly, and had seen the man he could become beneath the rough exterior of the man he had been. All because he had worn that suit to a church social and had decided to stop running and start living. That was a good story, he thought. That was the kind of story that deserved to be remembered and told to grandchildren and great-grandchildren, so they would understand where they came from and what it took to build something that lasted. That was a story about second chances and new beginnings, about finding love in unexpected places, about the courage it took to stay when running had always been easier. That was their story, and it was a good one. The end.